I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You know, we hate banks here, but we hate Hollywood even more. Stacy?
Max, there's been a call to revolution. Kill Hollywood. This is a headline from the reformedbroker.com, and Josh Brown says when the revolution begins and becomes apparent, one doesn't sit on his porch and watch. One gets his gun off the mantle and kisses the family goodbye on his way out to the field.
Oh, yeah. Well, the war is on, and the Kill Hollywood campaign has started. You know, we had the Occupy Wall Street movement on top of the Arab Spring movement, but this Kill Hollywood movement is really interesting because it sets the stage for a civil war in America.
Yeah, domestically in California, you would think Northern California, Silicon Valley, the tech community versus Hollywood, the old oligarchic, neo-feudal caste system. But so Reformed Broker, however, Josh Brown, is talking in particular about Y Combinator. This is a startup seed funder, and they looked at this situation. They saw SOPA, and they said, Hollywood appears to have peaked. If it were an ordinary industry, film cameras say, or typewriters, it could look forward to a couple of decades of peaceful decline. But this is not an ordinary industry. The people who run it are so mean and so politically connected that they could do a lot of damage to civil liberties and the world economy on the way down. It would therefore be a good thing if competitors hastened their demise.
Right, so Y Combinator is a seed fund capital firm which is pre-venture capital firm. It's an integral part in the capital formation that is NASDAQ, that is the huge growth that we've seen in online and Web 2.0. Now, they've taken an adversarial position against Hollywood because they recognize, and as they say in that quote, they're mean, they're well-capitalized, and they cheat. And their ability to undermine the system and to destroy free speech and to destroy a lot of what makes the economy grow is such that they need not to be left alone to just wither away and die. They need to be actively pursued and killed.
The industry of Hollywood needs to be killed. And, you know, he says that they're going to get violent and nasty on their way down, and we already see that. We saw that with SOPA, and he said this is, or Y Combinator says this indicates to them that Hollywood is dying. Poor Chris Dodd is the next headline. The former senator and now CEO of the NDAA can't catch a break. So he looked at the situation, the defeat of SOPA, and he said it was just a PR thing and that he blames, in particular, the tech community. He blames Silicon Valley. He said, you've got an opponent who has the capacity to reach millions of people with a click of a mouse, and there's no fact checker.
Oh, he's afraid of a mouse. Well, Chris Dodd, you know, he's one of these extraordinarily corrupt American politicians. He now runs the MPAA.
And what is the MPAA?
The Motion Picture Association of America. And you often hear their name mentioned along with the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America. And these two lobbying groups on behalf of Hollywood in an extraordinarily narrow interest of the copyright cartel, who is always for extension of copyright, is put a muzzle on speech in America and on innovation in America to satisfy the whims of just a few oligarchs, copyright cartel oligarchs in Los Angeles. And as we mentioned, it's a bit of a civil war because you've got the tech industry in Northern California, you've got the copyright mullahs in Southern California, and now these two are at loggerheads with each other. And we're siding, you know, with the technology, of course, the open source and the free speech. The copyright cartel in Hollywood is an ugly monopoly position that's done incredible damage, and I'm glad to see this fight finally spill out into the open. It's been in the shadows for a number of years. Now it's a mainstream fight, the main event.
Now, I want to show you just how America operates on this monopoly system. Here they have a digital dictator of Chris Dodd. He's the former senator for Connecticut. Before that, he was a congressman. I'm going to show you a picture of me in Connecticut, 1975. That's the year that Chris Dodd first became a congressman. Notice something? I was a little tiny girl. Exactly like all those people in Tahrir Square who only grew up, who only knew Mubarak. I have only ever known Chris Dodd and Joe Lieberman. They were always our congressperson or always our senator. They were always ruling us, determining what Connecticut could do. And here he is. He goes over to the MPAA and the whole internet space suddenly has become a genuine threat since Mubarak was overthrown.
Yeah, you mentioned Mubarak, and the Mubarak regime toppled quickly because of the Facebook revolution. It caught Mubarak off guard, obviously, and the entire region is still trying to figure out this whole thing of social media. Same thing with Hollywood. They have been quietly putting in for copyright term extensions for decades. They've had their way for decades. Suddenly, mobilization against SOPA and PIPA, within a day, within a week, it was defeated in Washington with lightning speed, and those mullahs, those oligarchs in Hollywood were taken down a peg, similar to the way Mubarak was taken down. And now the fight is on. Now that people realize that Hollywood is the enemy of free speech.
When Mubarak realized the danger to his monopoly, he controlled all industry essentially in Egypt as his private fiefdom. Now compare this to the NDAA. Hollywood realizes that there's a genuine threat to their monopoly position. And what do? They go onto state television, Fox News, and threaten the soldiers if they don't do enough violence on their behalf. NDAA openly threatens to pull funding from politicians who oppose them. So Chris Dodd, the head of the Motion Picture Association of America, went on to Fox News and he said, those who count on, quote, Hollywood for support need to understand that this industry is watching very carefully who's going to stand up for them when their job is at stake. Don't ask me to write a check for you when you think your job is at risk, and then don't pay any attention to me when my job is at stake.
Yeah, it's a remarkable admission that these politicians are for sale. And he's saying that unless you continue this monopoly position, we're not going to be supporting you in Washington anymore. And that's really a remarkable admission. And it shows you the stakes involved. And it shows you why the Internet community is mobilized now to take Hollywood down. And that's why Combinator, a seed capital firm, has written an open letter saying, we want to kill Hollywood. I mean, this is an amazing admission by an integral part of the capital model in the United States, that they're saying they want to kill Hollywood. And of course, there are business models in the wings, my own, PirateMyFilm.com, which is geared toward doing exactly that.
The other important thing to note here he is going on to Fox News, state television, and he's threatening politicians to give him more funding, to bail him out. Who is the man who actually wrote the legislation for SOPA? That was Lamar Smith, a so-called Tea Party member. He's demanding that the FBI operate as their collection agency. Imagine, here's an industry, the Motion Picture Association, which their product, Hollywood films, very few of them have ever made a profit. Probably less than a dozen in the last 30 years have ever technically earned a profit. Now imagine, the Tea Party is freaked out that Barack Obama bailed out GM. At least they made a profit in many years, and they do make a profit when they sell a car. Hollywood doesn't actually make any profits, they claim. So why are we subsidizing? Why would we get the FBI out? Should they start making sure nobody buys Toyotas in order to protect GM from their, bad habits of building cars that nobody could afford to operate?
Oh yes, the Hollywood accounting, as it's called, is the original Enron-style accounting. They book any incremental profits in the short term, and then they amortize losses for infinity. The executives pay themselves on this cookbook mentality, and now you see it running rampant throughout the entire economy. The banks on Wall Street, for example, they book all of their short-term profits, they dump the losses into the public domain. So this is now being carried back and forth. Then the insider trading between Hollywood, Washington, and Wall Street, exchanging information. Then there's another lobbying group, the Creative Coalition. I used to be on the board of that organization. And now the people are beginning to realize that Hollywood is the enemy. We need to kill Hollywood.
And part of that is that they don't want ideas to flourish, because this global cartel system that we see, the oligarchy that controls everything, they've realized in the last year, since Mubarak was toppled, that ideas are so much more powerful than even one of the most heavily controlled economies in the world. So you see this also in the currency that has kept that alive is the dollar. And you also see the same sort of response as SOPA to the dollar. Currency wars. Iran banned from trading gold and silver. Reuters reports that the EU has agreed to freeze the assets of the Iranian central bank and ban all trade in gold and other precious metals with the Iranian central bank and other public bodies in Iran. Max, so this is just applying to the European Union. They also are not allowed to trade oil with Iran. So how do you think this is going to affect the euro, the dollar, and will it preclude China, Russia, or other nations like India from operating?
No, of course not. It's financial suicide, of course, because it doesn't preclude China. China wants gold. Iran's got gold. They're going to do deals with China. And China is preparing itself in this currency war for a post-U.S. dollar reserve world.
And also, you've created markets. You created the Hollywood Stock Exchange. Is gold and silver, are they fungible commodities?
Well, of course. I mean, this is, it shows you how arrogant these policymakers in Europe are and why they're going to lose this currency war. It's very simple. That's why gold and silver are going higher.
So, of course, I said it also applies to oil. India joins Asian dollar exclusion zone, will transact with Iran in rupees. India and Iran have agreed to settle some of their $12 billion annual oil trade in rupees, resorting to the restricted currency after more than a year of payment problems in the face of fresh, tougher U.S. sanctions. So Zero Hedge concludes that, to summarize, Japan, China, Russia, India, and Iran, the countries which together account for the bulk of the world's productivity and combined are the biggest explorers and producers of energy, and now they're all coming up with bilateral deals, thus Obama's policies are actually creating this situation, the final death rattle of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency.
Right, and they hope that this will somehow stimulate their exports at the end of the day and save America and create jobs. But what they don't understand is that all they're doing is that they are empowering every single other nation on Earth to be able to escape the seigniorage that is the play of the dollar and to grow independent of the U.S. and to completely divorce themselves from the U.S.
And it also is the exact same sort of moment. Y Combinator is a seed capital fund for the internet space. China is the seed capital you could think of as for capitalism at this moment. They're the only ones with cash reserves financing a lot of things. So they must look at this in the same exact way that Y Combinator looked at SOPA. Y Combinator looked at SOPA and saw the death rattles of an industry. China has to look at this and see the same exact thing, that they're running out of ideas if their only idea is to shoot somebody.
It's certainly a good case to continue to keep accumulating gold and silver. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away, much more coming your way, so stay right there. Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to California and speak with author, radio show, and host Mike Ruppert of CollapseNet.com. Mike, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Max, great to be back with you again.
All right, Mike Ruppert, you're in California, home to both Hollywood and Silicon Valley. What is your take on the SOPA-PIPA debate? How is it playing out in the local news there in California?
Clearly in California, my take is that the press and the people perceive that SOPA and PIPA are in dire straits, and I don't think there's much hope to resurrect these bills. The opposition has been pretty uniform. I just made a trip down to L.A. recently and met with a number of people in the movie industry, and I did not see a lot of concern about it. So I think there's another agenda being followed.
Right. Well, clearly it's an assault on Hollywood. There's a venture capital firm now coming out and saying kill Hollywood with new ventures that will undermine the Hollywood copyright cartel. It's an assault on freedom of speech. And there's a bit of a civil war because the technology is in Northern California, the content copyright cartel is in Southern California. But is it just the sunshine and the dope and the drugs that make them impervious to what's going on?
Well, I think it's what we're seeing all over the world, as old ways of doing business are just no longer viable and no longer productive. This is kind of an evolution, and I think it's a healthy one, where we see more access to copy by more people instead of people holding on trying to squeeze the last nickel out of an orange.
Now, we've seen a really almost like a Mubarak-style crackdown on the Internet by the U.S. government over the past year. What do you make of that?
Well, we had the big crackdown on mega upload recently, which was a big blow, which prompted an immediate response from around the net and the community. Anonymous struck back. I found it hard to have a lot of sympathy for mega upload, having been in film myself and having my income depend upon back-end net profits, which never appeared. But nonetheless, I don't think it's a major blow. And I'm much more concerned about what's hidden behind the SOPA Act, supposedly as a measure to protect legitimate copyright or ownership interests for creative works. I think there's a much deeper agenda to shut off websites like yours, mine, and many others around the net. That's buried in the language of the Act.
Right, but aside from the obvious censoring, which they would love to do in the U.S. Because they hate the idea of competition. But getting back to the broader issue of copyright itself, copyright needs to be, the extensions, the term extensions of the past couple of decades should be repealed to be in keeping with the Constitution and the idea of fair use. The fact that they've been allowed to extend out to lifetime plus 75 years is a heinous misuse and misinterpretation of what a copyright should be. Do you fall in that camp, or do you see it differently?
Absolutely. I think that, we live in an era of shortages, and one of the big shortages out here is access to good, reliable, critical information by large numbers of people who can benefit from it, and this is a choke on that.
Okay, so as a content creator yourself, you're weighing the benefits of perpetual copyright, as Lawrence Lessig would call it, versus open, free communications, and you feel that the free communications and uncensored communication far outweighs in terms of importance, in terms of then protecting a couple of 100,000 filmmakers and porno makers in L.A. Now, the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, has also making its way through Congress at the same time as SOPA. Are these two related? Do you see any relationship?
Well, indeed, in that both are serious assaults on basic liberties protected by the Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution. And they come at it from different directions, but it's part of a broader overall agenda, which we've seen since the Patriot Act in 2001, of the government and corporations having ever more control on what we see, hear, and what we can say.
Now, Chris Hedges, who's one of these guys that I would imagine the government would love to marginalize even more than they've already marginalized by not having him on mainstream television, he thinks that the NDAA is basically allowing for the indefinite military detention of American citizens as it relates to the upcoming financial collapse. So they're kind of making some moves here because they know that this U.S. economy is in the process of free falling. Do you see that?
Absolutely, no question. There has been, and we've been tracking this at CollapseNet for well over a year now, as this tightening down has taken place, and we saw it with the Occupy movement, also in which I was deeply involved. That the government, whether through Homeland Security or other parts of the federal government and state governments, are doing everything they can to choke off and preemptively prepare for what they know is going to be civil unrest. And I also think they're trying to stir it up themselves so that they can take advantage of it with a brutal crackdown.
So now earlier we were reporting on India circumventing U.S. sanctions on Iran by using rupees to buy oil. This follows on similar news from China and Russia. These big trading blocs are bypassing the dollar completely and shunning the dollar as world reserve currency. And, of course, that's one of the keys for the American empire to continue. If that goes, then the U.S. loses that seigniorage on having the global currency, and it's another nail in the coffin. Does it make any sense for that policy in the U.S.?
Well, clearly what's happened here, and I think the United States is really getting pushed back severely on all fronts. What if the U.S. gave an oil embargo and nobody came? And that's exactly what happened. China, Japan, Korea, India have all said, no, we're going to continue to buy Iranian oil. And in fact, Chinese purchases of Iranian oil have gone up 30% in the last year, which is confirming for the basic theory and concept of peak oil. There is no place to go to replace Iranian oil. The Saudis cannot up production. Now, what's happening with this, and you're absolutely right, is we're seeing major moves, sometimes on an ad hoc quick basis, but I think some are more orchestrated, as in the Far East where there's a dollar-free zone, for nations clearly to liberate themselves from the dollar-denominated trap that's there. And those moves, I think, are taking place very quickly, and I think what we're seeing now is only going to accelerate that. There's clearly a shift of economic power away from the West, Europe and the U.S. obviously in decline, with, relatively speaking, China more ascendant, more powerful. Certainly they have a lot of cash and a lot of power. So I think that all these moves by the West, detached from reality as they usually are just accelerating the decline of Western economic power and influence.
All right, let's talk about Europe for a second. Get your take on this. Again, it's kind of my thought exercise. Curious what you think. Here you have a country, Greece. They were tricked into the Europe by Goldman Sachs, who committed massive accounting fraud. We now know. There's no doubts about this. As a result, they now are being asked to suffer through massive austerity measures while outside governments and corporations seize control of their income-producing assets. Now, on top of this, they're being told that they can't import oil from Iran because of the skirmish between Iran and Israel. They don't get along. So Greece can't have any more oil, which, of course, is going to crush their economy even more. Who decided that Greece suddenly had to go the way of all flesh and be terminated? Why is Greece? How did that happen?
It's the same bunch of idiots that have been running everything else. But I noticed in the stories today, and it's big breaking news, that the EU has supposedly banned Iranian oil imports. That's going to be a joke, and it's going to hurt nobody except Europe, because nobody else is going along with it. But in the fine print, which I found in a Reuters story this morning, this ban does not take effect until July, and there are side pocket exemptions being granted all over the place. So this is a toothless embargo. But, if we expected sanity to work in these markets, Max, you and I would have been crazy a long time ago. I mean, none of this makes sense from an overt, plainly logical step-by-step analysis. Every nation in Europe is going to get hurt, and I don't think all the system is capable of doing right now because it's so detached from honest dealing with the reality of the world around it. It's shooting itself in the foot, and that's what we've seen since 2008.
All right, Mike Ruppert, you mentioned, these markets are insane, they're getting more crazy. I mean, this is actually a theme of Davos this year. They're saying that we need to re-examine this entire model of capitalism. And also, David Cameron, who's the Prime Minister of Britain, has come out recently and said we need to move toward another, what he called moral capitalism. So the entire model of capitalism, as it's been understood, is now under threat. What's the problem, number one? And number two, are there any simple tweaks, changes that could be applied to kind of recalibrate this freight train of capitalism gone off the tracks?
Yeah, well, for For me, to make it easier for me to function sanely with the question, I would replace the word capitalism with organized crime. And all that we're seeing from the moves from Davos, David Cameron, and everybody else, and you and I both know this, is the organized crime people trying to exert more control and somehow smooth out the wrinkles in their criminal mechanism. Life got very easy for me last August when conceptually I just took a step back from everything that was happening in Greece and the build-up to the European crisis, which is here now. And I said, wait a minute, all these trillions of dollars of bailouts, which are being printed right now, require growth above 2007 levels. And with the, I don't know how many, 13, 15, 20 trillion, stupid number floating out there, the physical growth required to satisfy the obligations in the infinite growth paradigm repaying with interest is not possible because of resource limitations. Whether it's oil, energy, physical goods, or the raw materials used, the kind of growth required to pay all this off is just not possible. And I kind of stop there and back off, and I just say, I'm just going to watch these idiots shoot themselves in the foot because we know what the end game has to be because of physical law rather than press releases.
Right, that's an interesting point there. The GDP growth needed to work off the present load of debt would require a certain number of barrels of oil to work its way through the economy, roughly 1 trillion barrels of oil, and that 1 trillion barrels of oil does not exist. Therefore, it would be impossible to work off this debt. So debt jubilee at some point is a dead certainty. I would imagine,
Absolutely.
yeah, your thought is if it comes sooner, it's better than later.
I gave a speech in Portland, Oregon, September 11th, in which I said that mass universal debt forgiveness between sovereigns and corporations, that includes the banks, between corporations and people and corporations, is going to have to be wiped out. You have to hit that reset. Otherwise, you create the same rickety Italian cruise ship that's ready to hit on the rocks the moment the wind changes.
All right, Mike Ruppert, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Always a pleasure, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Mike Ruppert of CollapseNet.com. You can send me an email at keiserreport@rttv.ru. You can follow me on Twitter. Just go to Max Keiser. And until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.